Hello again and welcome to the program. I am Suren. What we discover so far through studying the human history, there might have been some people utilizing psychokinesis. If so, how did they do it? Why is it that humans of today cannot use psychokinesis to make life a lot easier for themselves? If psychokinesis was not at all possible, why the thought of it still exists? There are too many unusual, out-of-the-place happenings throughout the human history, which point to the fact that ancients have used psychokinesis to move objects from one place to the other. They may even have done so with their own selves, moving from one place to the other. However, today, in our so-called very practical days, humanity seems to have removed themselves completely from the possible chance of utilizing psychokinesis. Did humanity advance or did they go backwards? Was humanity more advanced in the past and that something very drastic has happened to have taken them backwards, not forwards? They are still fighting amongst themselves, still conducting war games, still unable to settle with what they have got. Has humanity advanced in their evolutionary path, or have they gone backwards? Some questions to ponder on. Only a few years ago, I have visited Egypt. And although I have not been able to enjoy my visit due to my having been troubled with someone whom I thought to be a genuine friend, but proving to be otherwise. However, I still observed the ancient articles of Egypt. Pyramids were of great fascination, built mainly of hard limestone or granite. They have placed them accurately, pointing to 4 directions with their 4 faces. They seem to date from about 4750 BC to around 3000 BC. It is believed that they started like a burial sites, and work went on during lifetime of the king or the pharaoh who was said to have built it. The stones utilized there were at least 2 to 4 feet in diameter, but facing stones were much larger. Many questions still remain. How did they raise those stones whilst building the pyramids? History have fallen short in telling how true it might be, and as it appears to be a part of inaccurate history, speaks of a great number of slaves had been used in this mammoth operation, although certain machines and even unknown forces were probably needed to move those stones from one place to the other. The most accurate historian so far has been Herodotus. According to him, the Great Pyramid was built by Cheops. When no one truly knows, but earliest date, according to Herodotus' estimation, was 50,000 BC. And that it probably took 100,000 men working for 10 years to build a causeway alone around 3,000 feet long to utilize it as a roadway in moving those stones. According to my friend Muhammad Makram from the Torah, for 20 years to build the pyramid. Herodotus' description, the method of building by steps and raising the stones from layer to layer by unknown machinery. Just imagine. Who knows, maybe facing the interior portions from top to down. The Great Pyramid was said to be built by Chems or Chalires, according to ancient historian Diodorus, but which was built by Sufis according to Mametho and Eratosthenes. Sufis corresponding to Shufur deciphered from the hieroglyphics or stones discovered by a Colonel Wise in his important investigations of this pyramid in 1835. This pyramid, when built, was 768 square feet at the base and 482 feet high to the apex in some unusual way. The apex has disappeared and the top is now 12 square yards, large enough to land a helicopter or other flying vehicle. Possibly the pyramid has never had a top, but was designed to be flat on the top. The masonry in the Great Pyramid is approximated to be 82,111,000 cubic feet. These stones, 49 feet above the base, have a passage through them running downward at an angle of 26 degrees and 41 for a distance of 320 feet, 10 inches to the original chamber, the subterranean apartment. It continues on for another 52 feet 9 inches into the rock, although for what strange purpose it had remains a matter of conjecture. This chamber is 46 feet long, 27 feet wide, and 11.5 feet high. From the entrance passage, another tunnel branches out and leads to a maze of another passage, a few other passages, and strange chambers. Another one is called the Queen's Chamber, located on exactly the center line of the pyramid, 67 feet above the base. It has a peaked roof and measures 17 by 18 and 9 by 20.3 inches high. Above the Queen's Chamber and 36.1 feet of the center line is located the King's Chamber, which can be reached through 150-foot passage, which branches off the Queen's Passage. The chamber is 34 feet, 3 inches long by 17 feet, 1 inch wide, and 19 feet and 1 inch high. This chamber is lined with red granite, which are highly polished single stones reaching from the floor to the ceiling, and the ceiling is formed of 9 large slabs of polished granite from wall to wall. The only furnishing is a tremendous sarcophagus of red granite, so large that it had to be introduced into the king's chamber when the pyramid was still being built. Just think about it. Now, the Great Pyramid, a large structure with detailed passages and chambers, would be very difficult, if not impossible, for us to duplicate in spite of all our architectural engineering skills. The Great Pyramid was constructed in some mysterious way, using knowledge from the brain of some highly intelligent persons. What indeed motivated these ancient people with rare knowledge of life after death to undertake a 30-year program to meet these intricate specifications for immortality? That's another good question. The second pyramid was 707 feet, 9 inches square, and 454 feet, 3 inches high. This pyramid has many passages running to strange dark chambers. Many other pyramids were built by Egyptians who were of a very strong faith about what was necessary for immortality. What gave them this strong opinion? This is a good question to consider. They certainly have learned less, surprisingly, as pyramids were built. Question: why did the king Nebuchadnezzar build a pyramid 235 feet high and 2,286 feet in circumference and dedicated it to the planets? Why did he build it in different colors of bricks? Did this king know about the planets long before the telescope ever existed? This has been asked before. Had the ancient Egyptians determined that some of the stars were close to us while others were much farther away? Just ponder on. With an estimated 100,000 men needed to build the Great Pyramid, huge problems of feeding, housing, and managing them would be the case. Among the 100,000 men were skilled stonemasons, construction workers, engineers, during all parts of that project. Could the narrow Nile Delta support this many Egyptian government employees? The engineering task of cutting stones from a quarry without TNT or other explosives and moving these extremely large stones on wooden rollers and hoisting the stones into their final resting place seems much more than men 6,000 years ago could accomplish. How the stones were cut from the quarry is a mystery. And so also how the wooden rollers were obtained in the Nile Valley, where only palm trees grew, is mystery. The trees could have been cut far away and floated down the Nile. But this would also have required a huge crew of men, because the logs would have worn out quickly from the constant cutting of stones on the top and bottoms. How were the extremely difficult maze of passages and chambers calculated for the first pyramids, and why were the remainder of the pyramids such close copies, yet without improvement? In fact, the rest of the pyramids seem to deteriorate in quality, even though some were built about 1700 years after the first great masterpiece. For some unknown reason, the Egyptians seemed to have learned less about pyramid building as they built them. Did the builder built all chambers in passages as the layers of the pyramids rose without using the passages except to place the mummies within them? An important question. What lights were used to enter the sepulchre? There seems to be no blackening of the walls and roofs from smoke in those days. None of the explanations for the pyramids, why they were built and how they were built, seem to stand up under critical examination. But there are other speculative possibilities which provide a reasonable explanation for the pyramids. Now, the mystery of the Egyptian civilization. When first observed in ancient history, Egypt was already old and grey, at the head of a procession of life that is limitedly vast. It is as if it had no beginning. It stands alone in an awesome ancient stand, while life remains a product with its pyramids. In the dawn of civilization, it is a sphinx among the sands or palms amid the desert of man's development. At its earliest known existence, Egypt was mature. It possessed the art of writing by system of hieroglyphics and the ideographs, which have passed into the form of phonetics, which normally requires centuries to be developed, a stage of advancement not obtained by the Chinese language to date. The monuments of Egyptian civilization testify to a most ancient and original race of men who cannot be traced to any line of rootage in another land. From out of the edge of the desert, this amazing apparition came in the head of an immense procession of life, issuing out of a past from which the tracks have been obliterated, like footprints in the shifting desolation of the desert sands. The mind of universal man is a mirror in which Egypt may be seen because the universal storehouse of knowledge reveals the mysteries of her glory. This mirror of the universal mind of man are reflected her pre-monumental and pre-monarchical past, during which she was governed by deities, gods. But much must be inferred. It is impossible from her mythology to establish starting point. Perfect art, language, and mythology did not alight ready-made in the valley of the Nile. And if the ascent is not traceable to the Nile, neither is it elsewhere. There is no mystery of proof that Egyptian civilization was imported from other lands. Their language shows no traces of derivation and descent from African languages, nor does early Egyptian art seems to imitate that of neighboring lands. Mythology. The mythology and the belief systems of the ancient civilizations tell us how deities from the heavens took part in the affairs of men. These are attempts of the ancient pagans to explain how the world was created and man came into existence. Those religious stories are very similar because of a gradual changing and improving of stories to make them more plausible. The deity Prometheus, one of the Titans, which belonged to a gigantic race who inhabited the earth before the creation of men, according to mythology, was assigned to task, along with his brother Epimetheus, of making men. The god created men in their image, with the help of Minerva, goddess of wisdom. They gave to man, from the chariot of the sun, the gift of fire, and the Bible tells that God gave man the special gift of a soul, the breath of life. The fire or soul could refer to the special gift, or in fact, the ability that man has of communicating, probably using a sixth sense, but most importantly, with higher intelligence. Myth, in addition to being interesting, may also give us a hint, or what was happening on Earth before the recorded history. The very first famous poets, such as Homer, about 1000 BC, told about gods and goddesses living on planet Earth. Where did they obtain their ideas is unknown, but the philosophers have suggested many theories. Now, one of these scriptures is a theory, according to which every mythological legend arrived from the narratives of the scriptures, although the real facts have been disguised, even altered. Deucalion was yet another name for Noah, like Utnapishtim in Sumerian. Hercules is Samson, and Arion would be Jonah. The dragon keeping the golden apples was the serpent that supposedly beguiled Eve. Nimrod's tower was the attempt of the giants against heaven. But this theory cannot be pushed far enough to account for many of the mythical stories. That is how it is spoken of, researched and spoken. According to theory, everybody named in those stories were once real people to whom has been added, through repeated stories told, and attributes of superhuman beings. And the story of Aeolus, the king and god of the wind, was supposed to have been the actual ruler of islands in the Tyrrhenian Sea, where he reigned and taught the nations how to sail better and forecast weather conditions. This sounds reasonable in light of the human characteristic of many a story becoming bigger as it is a retold line. Another theory proposes that all of the ancients were symbolical, containing moral, religious, and philosophical truths, which over the years of retelling became understood as a fact. And so, Saturn, devouring his own children, according to the legend, is the same power whom the Greeks called chronos, meaning time, destroying whatever it has brought into existence. And Io represents the endless wanderings of the moon. The theory assumes the primary ancient elements of air, fire, and water were objects of religious adoration, and the principal deities were personifications of the powers of nature. After personifying these elements, it is an easy transition to the notion of them being supernatural gods presiding over the affairs in nature. All of these theories which have been mentioned are probably partially true, and most probable that mythology sprang from all of those theories combined, instead of from one or anyone in particular. These myths have risen from the desire of men to account for those natural phenomena which he cannot understand. And some have risen from a desire to give a reason for persons and places. Egypt and its gods is a subject of intrigue. Profound scholars have tried to determine the beginnings of Egyptian civilization, and some of them have uncovered very interesting information. The story of creation in the Bible may have originated from Egypt, where the Nile River flooded yearly. The universal mythical beginnings with waters, and the genesis of creation with men created from the dust or the mud may be the offsprings of Egyptian parentage. In the search for the sources of Egyptian civilization, it has been established that their masterful art, language, and mythology were not brought to the Nile area, since these are not traceable to other places on the surface of Earth, but apparently originated in the Nile Valley. This civilization could be the symbolic Tower of Babel in scriptures, from which all nations of the world have originated. An American craniologist, Dr. Morton of 19th century, once exclaimed that he was compelled by a mass of irresistible evidence to say that the Egyptians were an Asiatic people. For 7 years of additional investigation, together with greatly increased materials, have convinced him that they were neither Asiatic nor European, but, believe it or not, Aboriginal and indigenous inhabitants of the Nile, or some contiguous region peculiar in their physiognomy, isolated in their institutions, informing one of the primordial centers of the human family. That is an interesting point. In the book of the beginning, it mentions that the oldest mythology, religion, symbols, and language all had their birthplace in Africa, and the primary race of Ham came from there, and civilization attained in Egypt emanated from there and spread over the world. It is possible that the Egyptians sent out colonies over the whole world in those days. It is also possible that they may have been teaching the Babylonians the astronomy. This idea was apparently supported by the story of Noah in Genesis, who assumed that the ark was Egypt, and starting point of all human races was there, a mystery of which one questions. Could it be the reason why Egypt should have made great straits in literally moving mountains and forming them into monuments of huge and majestic structures? Maybe we can listen to the statement of Ramesses III, who built a wall 150 feet in depth, 60 feet below ground, and 90 feet above. He actually said, "I dragged as hell great monuments of all giving them life in the making." Was this life had been some means of mental levitation, perhaps? Building the wall, they transported blocks of syenite, weighing about 900 tons, by land and water. The Cathedral of Notre Dame could be placed in one of the halls of the temple at Karnak as a small central ornament. So vast a scale of its operation. How did the Egyptians obtain this knowledge for such great undertakings? In the book of Beginning, Egypt was considered to be the land where the Homo sapien species reached its full stature. Yet the Egyptians recognized the black race of Africa as being the first of creation. They thought they were born of the Great One, who is in heaven, while the black race was born in his eye as superior beings. The deities of Egypt were numberless. Some were also recognized in Ethiopia. In those very ancient times, they used to carry the images of Zeus and other deities from the temples of Thebes to Libya and celebrated a splendid feast of 12 gods. This was done so at an annual Ethiopian festival, at which time statues of Egyptian deities were also taken into Ethiopia. Plato, who spent about 13 years in Egypt, trying to determine the beginnings of their history, reports that the divine hymns or songs worthy of the deity, which were considered to be about 10,000 years old. When we go back further into the mythology, many monarchs reigned, and prior to these was the direct dominion of the deities. The story sounds almost like Sumerian or Mesopotamian. Now, the records of two dynasties of deities and demigods, which were collected from the temple records, rectified by Lepsins, a 19th century historian, and from various Greek chronological writers, traces Egyptian dynasties back 13,820 years. Herodotus says, from the first king to the priest of Vulcan, or Ptah, last reigned, there are 341 generations of men, and during these generations, there were the same number of priests and kings. With 341 generations being equal to 11,340 years, they said that in the past, 11,340 years, no deity had assumed the form of a man. Neither had such a thing happened before or afterwards in the time of remaining kings of Egypt. That certainly means that the gods in the form of men ruled in Egypt in ancient times. Herodotus found that the priests claimed to have made chronological observation during a period of about 52,000 years. It was in Egypt that the transition from mythical data to existence of one god also took place. Ra, the ram-headed deity, also called Amen, of hymns, together with Nun and Chan. Some older gods were merged into an image of the one God, the Ammon of hymns, in which he is celebrated as the one in his works, single among the gods, one who was the maker of existences, the one alone with many hands, and the one alone without peer. Ra is credited with saying, "I say a great thing. Listen, I will teach you the nature of eternity." And supposedly the Egyptian eternity was Aeonian, who had been the timekeeper of its cycles and master of mysteries, the builder of the Ark of the Eternal, was born to rebuild it and cover it with fresh figures. Today we may find similarities to a space vehicle for a space traveler in this expression of what was happening over 12,000 years ago in Egypt. It seems that Egyptian civilization is more than 40,000 years old, possibly up to about 12,000 BC, being superior to the Egyptians ruled the people. These superior beings taught many advanced concepts to Egyptians, which gave them the ability to build outstanding monuments, even by today's standards. Only scraps of information are available to give us some idea or why these great monuments were built. Egyptians may have been taught how to use psychokinesis to build the pyramids. Question: were the pyramids a public works project? Perhaps. It has been asked before. This is the question Adrian V. Clarke, the scientist, asks also. He further explains that the most widely accepted reason for the building of the pyramids is for monuments for the early pharaohs. And Mendelssohn takes exception and proposes, as he says, that the pyramids were built as a national economic endeavor. He also thinks that some respected personality with great engineering ability, the king, on the idea of building the pyramids to unify the kingdom and bolster the nation of economy. And the first pyramid was Zosa at Saqqara. Pyramids became smaller and of poor construction, according to Mendelssohn. The first project started, required about 100,000 men, and to continue with the employment on an even level. He believed that Egyptians continue to build other pyramids at rapid pace. 100,000 man force. Mendelssohn that the 6 largest pyramids were built in less than a century, says, after which they rapidly became smaller and shoddier. Pyramid building became an economic necessity. Whether or not there was a pharaoh ready to be buried in there. According to Mendelssohn, the Egyptians invented the state form of centralized and efficient organization which was then unknown to humanity. During this time of pyramid building, Egypt's prosperity increased rapidly because of employment opportunities being very high. 100,000 men producing not a very useful product which others could probably purchase, it seemed impossible that the prosperity could be a result of the government public works project. According to Mendelssohn, the Mexican pyramids were built for the same economic reasons as in Egypt. According to him, that the legend describes the building of the large pyramids of Egypt and Mexico towards inspiration of an outstanding sage. We will talk about that, who further taught the natives many of their arts and crafts. Legend defines that the sage was deified and would return to Mexico from the east. But there were no tombs found in the Mexican pyramids, although one was the Pyramid of the Sun. However, Mendelssohn has been criticized for having created a very weak theory. The question still remains: was levitation used in pyramid building? I shall leave it with you to consider. Science looks at life in the universe. Was a superior extraterrestrial life responsible for the building of Egyptian pyramids? Probably utilizing psychokinesis or other forces were the supreme beings responsible for the myths about deities. Turning to scientific possibilities of life in the universe, and even the possibility of advanced life, says A.V. Clarke, the scientist, and even the possibility of advanced life already far into space age when Egyptian civilization began. We can examine what scientists have so far discovered about the universe. We know the universe is over millions of years old by scientific calculations, and the Earth is only about 4.7 billion years old. The difference of over 6 billion years provides a long time for life to have developed elsewhere before it developed on planet Earth, regardless of how life came into existence here on this planet. It could have come into existence elsewhere in the universe much earlier, and that this view is quite logical. Remember that universes, billions of suns similar to the one known on Earth, which certainly has planets similar to this planet, It has been estimated by some cosmologists that possibly billions of Earth-like planets exist, and they have been discovered today with the new additional advancements in the field of the science of astronomy in the universe, which life as we know could exist, with so many possibilities of life. It would be an extremely unusual case for existence to have developed only on this one planet we occupy. Observations being made of the universe at great distances from us indicate that laws of nature observed at those distances are exactly the same as they are on Earth. The law of gravity and the behavior of light seem to be the same wherever they are being observed in the universe. These observations could lead us to assume that other natural laws, which have not been yet observed at greater distances, could also be the same throughout the universe. Therefore, the natural law involving the origins of life on Earth could apply to over 100,000 other planets in the universe. When a planet is ready for life, it develops, probably being seeded, evolves, or something else occurs, resulting in intelligence as we have it on Earth. The 6 billion years before this Earth existed in the universe, many other planets were passing through the phase which might have produced life on Earth as well. We can easily say that many planets have produced life. If only one planet produced life during the first 5 billion years of the universe, this life would have had over 5 billion more years to expand into space, as we are now doing, before the Earth reached to the Egyptian period. We can assume that if the Earth's civilization continues its technological growth for another 5 billion years, we should be spread throughout the entire universe, considering if there are laws and ways which will permit us to travel at a greater velocity than light. We should someday be able to visit many other civilizations in the universe, which will be probably similar to Egypt of 40,000 years ago. We further assume that advanced universal civilizations have not visited the Earth during its life. We don't know, but can be statistically probable. Once this conclusion has been reached, many mysteries recorded in history, in myths, religious stories about the acts involving psychokinesis begin to make some sense. Those who consider the biblical stories to be factual, and proofs are seemingly given that extraterrestrial life, usually called like angels for example, was on Earth during the rapid development of civilizations. Many people with knowledge of space and space travel have assumed that God, angels, and even a singular God were the astronauts who visited the planet Earth. Here is an interesting question about the God of Genesis. Was he perhaps also an astronaut? Just think about it. I thank you for sharing this time with me. Smile, be happy. Until we meet again. Thank you.